have a few questions, and I know that you're busy. But maybe if you like the first question, I can ask another question. Okay. Would you agree that as well as providing the necessary information that is the blueprint of social change, we should also promote the necessary information to empower the individual to act on such information? I meet a lot of intellectual people that have these ideas, but they're afraid of speaking in public. They're afraid of standing up for truth because I believe it stems from a fear of death. And if you have a fear of death, you have a fear of ridicule as well. So, that's my question.
Yeah, we're always trying to empower people. It's to me like empowering people to act and giving them mental tools and verbal tools to take on this kind of activism. And we're all cut from the same cloth, ultimately. I mean, there's some of us that stick out and do more kind of activism or more effective activism, but we're all, cut from that same cloth. And there's a tendency to think that there's like something different in someone that you just don't possess. But I'm constantly interacting with people at that level that we to empower each other to step up and really act like there isn't anything else happening in the movement. Like you really taking the perspective that there isn't, like if I'm in the LA chapter, for example, okay, or any activist group anywhere, I'm gonna take the perspective that there actually isn't any network or structure in place, any movement in place that's already doing things. I want to act like there isn't that, so I can step up, because people tend to rely on that like structure that's already there, moving things forward. Like you really have to walk with that understanding that it is out on you, and not in a way that's like, oh, it's on you and you have to do it, but just walking with that understanding that it's going to take everybody in some kind of capacity.
I would just add that there's a tendency to resort to very minimalistic behavior in an attempt to counter this system, which is something that everyone's in support of. There's the old saying that you should act with your dollar, you should vote with your dollar. That's sort of the propaganda you get within the monetary structure, that, if you don't like this company, you just don't use them, as though that's actually a solution, as though the system doesn't reinforce pressures to move towards, say, the worst manufacturers because, well, they're most cost efficient. You can actually afford this stuff, which is why the green economy is so hilarious, because all the really healthy and sustainable products being produced without all the negative, unsustainable practices that are out there are actually the most expensive. So it's just comedic to me that you have to be more or less well-to-do to be socially concerned. As I stated in my Toronto lecture, caring is a convenience. I mean, it's a luxury to care. And that's something I think people forget when they attempt to describe how you should just act, or don't support this GMO or blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really work that way when the pressures, the externalities of our lives come into play, because we're all in deficiency in this model. So with that said, it's a very tough question. I think that, as Brandon pointed out, you have to just begin to act in your own way. And I think contribution and development towards the model very specifically is the best way to go. And I recommend, if anyone hasn't seen the Toronto lecture, and it's also in the book, but I detail 2 big projects that anyone can participate in. It doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge to do so, that can actually create the foundation of this type of social model that we put forward. So I'll leave it at that. But it's a very difficult subject.
It seemed like you were also asking about encouraging people to be courageous.
It's making people feel powerful enough to act on the change which they know needs to be done.
That's a very important concept that I'm glad you brought up, because in a movement of this nature that's so grassroots, we get a lot of language that is that we're leaderless, and that's kind of come back to bite us in a bit, because the term leader also means to go first. And what's happened is I've seen people afraid to step out and go first because they're afraid, I don't want to be seen as I'm trying to be a leader. And we actually need people to go first.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to watch your language around leadership and to really encourage other people, if they're good at something or if you're good at something, to not be afraid of stepping out and going first, because that's exactly what we need. And the people in this room are going to support you in doing that when you're advocating this kind of thought. And the thing is you may not feel like a leader in this room, but when you go to work, maybe you're the only person who is thinking about these ideas, or when you go to the gym, maybe the people you interact with there. So please be a leader, and I want to encourage you to do that, and to be careful not to pull down people who are stepping up. I mean, we've certainly had that to different degrees of people worried, like, oh, you're too visible or something. And we don't want anybody to get an ego about this. This isn't about us as individuals.
This is a selfless movement.
It's right, but we want to be sure that people know that we want you to go first. We want you to, and there's an infrastructure behind you, even if it's not there with you in the moment. So we do want to encourage that, and I hope that you will help me in doing so.
In regards to action, I say we should build the new world in the shell of the old to whatever extent possible, but to keep in mind that the whole point of that old world is to make sure that that new world that you want doesn't happen. So we need to also go farther than those minimalistic approaches in our own lives.
This isn't a question, it's a comment, if I may. Jen, I'm delighted to hear what you have to say, last said, because I've been all through the democracy fetish of the 60s and 70s, which screws up everything. I'd like to go to the bathroom. All in favor? Point is, team needs a quarterback, orchestra needs a conductor. Carlo Maria Giulini, the former conductor of the LA Philharmonic, what do you do? He said, I am a musician of the orchestra. That's what he is. He plays a little stick and faces the other way. So I'm delighted to hear all that.
Who's next? You have a question over there.
Okay, so yes. So standing up helps
Yeah.
the back hear you.
And
So
loud.
to like,
Yeah.
so we can throw things
For the
at you.
camera too. So I'm grateful for all the information that's been brought up. We understand the monetary situation. We are in this paradigm. I know what we can do as individuals. The solutions are out there. How do we affect public policy? How do we work with the system to affect change?
It depends what your goal is. If your goal is to ease the stress of the current model, it's a different path than it is to move towards the new system. The new system has to come from a completely grassroots place, because I don't know why any corporate or government establishment would ever find motivation. They're working within a model that is absolutely against everything that we're talking about. So again, back to developmental projects, creative projects, virtual projects, I think is the best way to go. But I will say that there is going to be a point where everyone is going to have to start doing something to counter the negative byproducts of this system, regardless of our interest in a new system. And this is something I've rarely talked about. In my Toronto lecture, I had about 15 minutes prepared that I was not able to complete because it was overrun in time. But I talked about a hybrid economy very loosely. Yeah. And that's just something I will mention briefly here. It's something that everyone should think about. How would you use policy to just be more sustainable? There were about 7 different points of this. I'll just give you one. There used to be, Bell South was the original phone manufacturer in the States, and they would lease their phone to you, basically. You basically just had the phone, and you used their service. But they own the phone. Yeah. And you could throw that phone down a flight of stairs, it would never break. I have one, actually. I could throw it off my roof. It's not going to break. It's not like a cell phone. It's not like anything that's made today out of the absolute cheap, most cost-efficient materials. You create a leasing structure mandated leasing structure for everything created. So let's say Apple, they have a 10-year lease or say warranty, 100%. They have to make sure they guarantee everything they make for 10 years. You see Apple change their behavior very, 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 very rapidly. If they had to actually replace, update, and design things to be updated, understand technological development and the exponential increase, Moore's Law, they would begin to think about what it means to actually keep things together so they would reduce their costs because it would be their responsibility. That's one thing, which I think it actually would be a very amazing thing to put forward as a mandate for corporate America, just an absolute law that says you are responsible for X number of years. If anything happens, you are going to take the reins to fix it or repair it. That would be a great first step.
Yeah.
Also, I understand your question because I did, before the Zeitgeist movement even existed, I was an activist for many years for anti-war, environment, trying to change public policy to no avail. But there is a transitional period right now where there are some things that are worthy of supporting in that transition. For example, you know, the first country has a guaranteed life wage now in Switzerland, you know, where you get a guaranteed income for no work.
They don't have it yet, but they're working on it.
Working on it, on the way. But as an example, or for example, Marianne Williamson running for Congress, but she was not taking any money from anyone, as an example. Not that once she can get in, she's going to be able to change everything, but just efforts like that that are towards something, because obviously we want post-monetary, post-need for all of that anyway, political, but in the meantime, you know, there are things on the state levels that are making a difference. Look at gay marriage. I mean, that was through policy that people kept at it, and it's helping, you know. But of course, we look at the bigger causal issue of being post-political altogether. But I think there are worthy efforts in the transition. You know.
I'll make one other point that I think, from an evolutionary standpoint, I think it's also in the book. I think this might be relevant in the future, because that word ephemeralization, doing more and more, less and less, what that will enable will be countries in the future that will be off the grid, so to speak, in globalization. I firmly believe that. They will develop a internal structure where they don't need to trade anymore on the international level. And with that, there might be a possibility this side to actually become increasingly efficient. They apply these old socialist ideas, but in a high-tech way. I can see this happening in the very lush regions of Latin and South America. And they just break themselves off. And they set the first precedent as a country that maybe doesn't have any money, maybe is actually using technical means to distribute to meet all human needs, all the things that we talk about. If that set the precedent, that would be amazing. It could also happen in a small community. We don't promote just, you know, small communities that would go off the grid and live in lo-fi ways. You know, I love open source ecology. I love all these lo-fi possibilities out there, but it's not really going to solve anything in the long run unless it is indicative of the technologies that we're trying to employ. And it's just a matter of time before 3D printing and the programming stuff will come to a point, become so accessible, become so cheap, because that is the sort of unique paradox of the whole thing. And as an aside, it's the one thing I think about that could actually save this system. The only thing that could possibly save this system is the advent of technology finally reaching that point where it's so cheap it's able to keep it together, but it would never improve it. It would just keep it this flat line of misery with just enough to survive. That scares me. I call this in the book the techno-capitalist apologists. These are the guys that really, they're Kurzweil Institute people, they really believe that the market system can prevail with all this technology. They're missing the entire foundational premise of what actually the system is defined as, what it really does. So it's this new advent of the next 50 years, the technology becomes more and more abundant and cheap, and I think people will be able to get off the grid in much more radical ways, where they can really detach, in fact, from the political system after a certain point.
And what's important with those off-grid communities is also for them to eventually become federated, so when one of them falls, they can help each other out with mutual aid, because one of the reasons why these lifeboat communities, if you will, fail in the past is because they haven't federated with each other. It's sort of isolated.
Right.
So, Gore Vidal said, it's not enough to succeed, others must fail. So, there are a lot of elements to the human psyche that are populating Earth right now. Besides ours, there's faith-based ideologies, greed-based ideologies, individualism. The system is perpetuated by that narrative, which is supported by many of those systems. If we can kind of psychoanalyze those who benefit from the current system, it's people that probably you can certifiably say are narcissists, arguably even psychopaths. The system rewards narcissism and psychopaths, and so the system itself is psychopathic, obviously. Now, obviously, the greedy individualists, like, not greedy individualists, anarcho-capitalists like Stephen Molyneux, who you actually totally beat in that debate, I want to add. The irrational fundamentalists, they have their actual personal identity tied into perpetuating the system. So, they stand to lose if people like us, and for the world for that matter, actually stand to win.
No,
how do you dislodge that?
No.
First of all, they're not going to lose their stuff, which is generally the underlying fear of what they're going to lose. They're not going to lose any power, because But what I mentioned to you earlier is something that where we all will win is in the overall health of the society in which they live. See, this is thinking about everybody living in a bubble, okay? So say you're wealthy. You don't live in a bubble. You're not immune to the environment and the socioeconomic system, the other people, and the whole thing, the city that you live in or wherever it is. You're part of that system. And everything that goes wrong, the lack of integrity in that system, the environmental degradation, the increasing stress levels, the increasing cancer rates, affect everybody, rich and poor.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm a Mac fan. I was sad the day Steve Jobs died. He's a billionaire, not immune to cancer. So the problems in this system translate out. So what's in it for them? Increased health and well-being. You know, increased capacity of our technological capacity for everybody. Look, are they really going to be bummed out if 1 billion people stop starving? I mean, it's like, it just, no. You know, unless they really are psychopaths. You know, it's like...
Well, there you go.
To build on that, which those are all great points, I'd say it's less psychopathic and it is utterly antisocial. It's just antisocial. We live in an antisocial society. It's not a social system, it's an antisocial system. It's completely predicated on refusal to acknowledge that there's a community issue, that we share a habitat. And with that, as Jason pointed out, the chickens will always come home to roost one way or another if you have unsustainable practices, and no one is immune at all. And I think the one thing I'd add to that, though, is the power issue, which I think is what the real fear is, because this whole system's based on power. If you have a lot of money, you have freedom. It's I just watched a recent documentary, and this artist referred to it as, he's like, I don't have any fuck you money, referring to the fact that if you have enough money, you can just say, fuck it, I don't have to deal with any more of the nonsense that I've been putting up with my entire life, because you're actually free. And I think if people realize what that actually means, they would change their values accordingly. Not to mention, they would begin to think about their relationship and be more satisfied with the true foundation of what human happiness is, which is that relationship to everything else around you. That's what success is. And that's what people have lost. It becomes to be desensitized and dehumanized. And I think people would regain that. I mean, what was the great quote in the Scorsese film, The Wolf of Wall Street? He goes, money just doesn't get you a nicer car or a better house. It makes you a better person. Because you can donate to your favorite charity, you can save the spotted owl if you want to. And that is the sickness. That's the idea of this artificial sense of relationship, which is why people look up so heavily to the Bill Gates of the world, and they're not bad people, by the way. But they persist within a model that is elevated them to such an extent artificially that I think at the end of the day you can't really qualify them as being empathic or humanitarian in the position that they're in for many different reasons. So I'm deviating a little bit with that, but I think the true value of what it means to relate will eventually be realized by the people with immense power and wealth, and they'll begin to see the error of what they've been doing for so long, and it's no longer reinforced. When we stop looking up to them, I mean, that's the big issue. I mean, how many people really feel great about their billions of dollars if everyone hated them for it? I don't mean that to say you should hate people that have a lot of money. They don't know any better. But imagine if you finally built that ethic of, you have a 50-room mansion and 2 jet parks. It's a form of violence. If you instill that value, that you're distorted if you really think you need all this. And look at what you're doing to everyone else. You think everyone else can live this way? What about CO2? What about all the poor people surrounding you? And you're hoarding billions of dollars of food in your bank account that actually be given to people and save pretty much the whole town. What was the statistic? That the richest 10 people could solve poverty 100 times over? It's ridiculous out there. I mean, how people can read that and be in that class and not feel absolutely guilty, it blows my mind. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Well said.
Okay. The question that I have, if the human being, once given access to the necessities of life, understanding human nature as it is primarily selfless, isn't it easy then to convince those that have the wealth to determine, to use it in a way so as to use the system against itself? There's a lot of people that ask, what's the most effective way to change society? I think it might be if we talk to these people that have amassed great wealth yet have read few books, they should be the easiest to convince. And these are people that will be called money martyrs. There's an emergent youth that will make a lot of money, and they're already making a lot of money because they have the idea that the old traditions are dying. These are the creative young people with the energy. They understand who they are better than those that through neural connections don't work as fast. They understand that human society is primarily selfless if it has the ability to create abundance, which we do. So why can't we gain those people and have them be in our team, like speaking to them in person?
So who would be the first one of these types that you'd speak to?
The first would be someone that I'm already in contact with, as well as other investors that would not have, I don't think they would, I think that that would bring them great joy. And this is using all the information that the Zeitgeist movement promotes. If that is what human nature is, then how would it be difficult to convince people of their own nature if you just ask the right questions in person?
Right.
Culture's too powerful, though.
I mean, I would have to say, if that works, then asking them should make the difference.
It's like asking a drug addict to stop doing drugs.
That's right, it's money.
No,
That's right.
but like I said, the emergent wealthy elite. I believe that if we,
Do you think they're more socially conscious because they're younger?
I do, because they're more receptive to ideas.
That might be true.
It's like a child, he's more
Right.
open to learning, but an old man, he thinks he knows what he's doing because he's been on this ride for too long.
It could be a communication project that you could create to try and find people like this and bring them here. And let us work on them.
Well, I think I know what you're saying, because even someone like Russell Brand is talking about what we're talking about without saying it. You know, he's not saying the Zeitgeist movement, but everything he's alluding to in all of his speeches is about this this unifying consciousness going on, that people want to do something, they feel connected to their environment, but they don't know how to live in a post-monetary world. So I think you're right, it could be with a lot of young entrepreneurs that do feel that connection more with their environment.
I would stress that what we're doing here for everyone else is equally important, because you have to understand that the idea that we need a wealthy person to convince people means there's a monetary incentive to the information. And I think that, that could help in the micro level, but from a standpoint of actual change, we need a value system to change, and we need people to actually disconnect from we need money in order to. I'd like to see people thinking, and it may happen in a micro level. Well, I can give this example. On the East Coast, when the hurricane came through and Occupy stepped up where the Red Cross did not, they actually became the network that is sort of illustrating what we're talking about. And I think, unfortunately, it might be those kinds of circumstances that bring people to come to that. But it was that value system that, okay, we need money and we need authorities. No, wait a minute, we have resources. So it was a different way to orient, and they actually accomplished quite a bit just from connecting with each other and making things happen and not waiting for government intervention, not waiting for somebody with money to sponsor the relief effort. They organize. So I would say it's a good idea to try that, but I think you're going to also need to do, what we're doing here to reach as many people as possible with the information.
And I have to agree with everything that you've said. However, you are misunderstanding that I'm saying we need people with money before we act. And what I'm saying is no, because we're acting, we need to unite the people that have money, because you cannot deny that money is a tool that has the ability to erect things like a vertical farm. You misinterpreted what I said in the sense that I'm saying we need wealthy.
No, we understand.
Now this is my passion. Like I said, we're all selfless.
The first thing I'd ask for is if you get someone with some wealth that wants to help us out. My website for the movement is a lot of work. I use some of his funds.
It would help. It really would.
It would be to invest on a 44-acre ranch in Malibu to erect a vertical farm. If we can create, but what I need is, what we need.
The system doesn't incentivize it, though. We were talking the other day, me and Phil, about the people that have enough money to literally feed the entire world. We just kind of went over this, but the system doesn't incentivize it. It would literally be not good for the economy, right? I mean, industry would suffer, economies would suffer, community, real people would suffer from, actually taking care of solving problems. That's the whole relationship.
It's such a foreign thing to do. It would be absolutely contradictory to everything, every ethic of any market-minded individual to spend, say, $1 billion to make a vertical farm with what? Give it away for free? Get the food. I mean, I would love to meet that billionaire eccentric, by the way.
Yeah.
They might exist.
No,
but
this is not a billionaire eccentric. I said that it is an emergent wealthy elite. But what I'm saying is, yes, there's a lot of people that have been indoctrinated into this train of thought. But isn't human nature more powerful than the indoctrination of this society's false belief system?
I'm not sure if I understand your language clearly. This is a cultural phenomenon. The human nature will kick in once the collapse inches farther in, and people wonder that of great wealth why there are 10,000 people slowly trying to push their gate over because they have no more resources. The pressures of the system are going to manifest themselves one way or another. The human nature aspect will be the realization that the fear of collapse of society, fear of ecological collapse, fear of having an absolute rampant pollution. These things will be the pressures that will move forward, most likely long before some subculture of young entrepreneurs decide to say that you're going to do some funding for sustainable anything. But even if it's sustainable, they're going to want to make their money back in some way. And that's the big question I ask you. What is their incentive in this model to do that? Just because they want to be nice? They're going to give it away? Do they have that much excess? So it's the human nature thing you bring up, I don't understand. This has nothing to do with human nature within and of itself. It has to do with the fact that there's too much cultural inhibition, and the structure of the model of the system doesn't reinforce anything that you're suggesting.
I believe that it was you that once said, you don't just open your door and walk out and find everybody dead. I believe that this
We're going to have to take some more
already-
questions here soon.
Okay,
Yeah.
go
No,
ahead.
no,
I understand that this is a debate. We'll get a beer after this.
Yeah, so we do want to get to other people's questions for the sake of time. This is a larger conversation that goes beyond the scope of the Q&A. So go ahead, Sam.
This is good because it kind of segues into my question.
Okay.
So, if the Zeitgeist movement defines itself as an education-based movement, what actions can individuals take outside of this forum to achieve these goals? Or maybe a more succinct way of saying it is, how can we live these values given the socio-cultural paradigm we operate under now?
Partly that's up to you, really. I mean,
I'm working on it.
Yeah. I do what I can within the means that I have. I mean, I have to go submit to employment most of the time, so I have enough available funds to do things like this. You know. But how that looks like is really based on people's creativity. You know. So I guess I don't have a singular answer to your question. I've actually been noticing a trend today, and somebody else asked me. I'm realizing it's a non-linear question, and you're looking for a linear answer. Okay, it's like how do we get there? It's a non-linear question. You're looking for a linear answer. So what does it look like? Well, it's like, what's it going to take? It's like it may take enough people to change their value set. Okay, then you start breaking down to the next question: what could I do to impact that? And then that's based on your skill set. Sorry.
So from this room, I'd like for those of you who are involved in nonprofit efforts or efforts that you would consider transitional in your spare time to raise your hand. You don't have to say what it is. Okay, so your question should be directed to each one of these people to get the answer, because that's really the answer, and this is a great illustration.
Okay, then maybe I could restate my question briefly. We talk a lot about the life ground, and I find that the way a lot of us are affecting activism is attempting to get back at the life ground, like urban gardening and gardening being my favorite example, but it's a tough transition, and it's a slow movement. And I would love to see more discussion of that. And I think the Zeitgeist movement is the best place for that around right now.
I think the phrase "go off the grid" is the best possible thing you can say, and stop the movement of money in whatever form possible to further compound the pressures that are occurring naturally through technological unemployment and all the population gravitations that we're seeing, where there just isn't enough employment to go around. So rather than endure that, try to find alternative systems that can continue to slow economic growth, which will put pressure on the system to highlight change and of course, bring up solutions. As I stated earlier, there are modern technological means to get your house completely off the grid. You have a lot of money to do that now, but over time you won't. And if you really think about how to do it, in a less consumeristic manner. Try your best to repair things and to be conscious of sustainability, as we've talked about before in this sort of patchwork generalization. But if everyone did that in a dedicated way, you would see a greater awareness of the problems that are emerging in the general population, and therefore the seeds get planted as to, okay, what do we do? Because eventually, to be the point where all the traditional economists and all the nonsense and propaganda about economic growth and what we need to do this and that and removal of government and blah, 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 that's going to fall flat and no one's going to buy it anymore, especially when they can't meet their needs and they're wondering why their kids are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and why they are $100,000 in debt. All the general deficiencies that the system created, I can go endlessly on about. And with that, as long as the movement continues its pressure, I know it sounds redundant and boring, but the movement continues to have its pressure, create its chapters, reinforce the chapters don't burn out. We say, this is what we're doing. We still have our day jobs, we're still active charity, trying to do things, reduce consumption, be sustainable. But the moment this engulfing movement really presents itself, people are going to see it, and it's going to explode. And then the new value shift will occur instantly, because people will realize what's possible. They'll realize what we can actually do. Now, the in-between of that is an enormous gray area. No one can answer that question. I bring it up only with my concept of individual countries going off the grid from other countries, or small communities that are high-tech, that are actually having the values put forward. And not to give it away, but my new film trilogy depicts just that.
Not to give it away.
So just to go back down towards, because you're saying outside of, the movement, outside of this forum.
Only
what
if
can
the
we
Zeitgeist
do?
movement is defined as an educational movement, right?
Right.
That was my
Outside of flyering, outside of creating chapters, outside of your own understanding of these issues, wearing it on your sleeve, so to speak, and talking about this stuff, talking to people. People do change. I've had friends that I've talked to about it and about it, but just about the awarenesses and about the understandings and the values and how it's self-realizing when you reference this stuff from a certain perspective. It's there's a logic to it. So people, and I've noticed these same friends like change over the course of a year or two. It does work on people over time. You don't even have to hammer it in. I mean, we all have different personalities too, as far as getting the stuff across. So we all have our own different ways. But outside of that, I mean, it's an ongoing value shift. I'll just touch on the value shift because that's kind of what I talked about today. Within what Peter just talked about, it transitionally, getting off the grid and such. There's this ongoing social interaction that we all, perpetuate every day. I see it all the time. I mean, I see. Here's an example. I see. I just want to give an everyday example. You're driving around and you see someone and some car pulls in front of them or something, and that's like just so bad. It's like so frustrating for them. They throw their hands up. And like they just give them a bad look, and it's just so unnecessary, and so it has such an effect on our environment. It really continues this cycle of like antisocial behavior and like not connecting with each other, and just it continues that cycle. So it's just that it can be that simple, like just choosing to like be more pro-social and be more like understanding of each other. It's like wouldn't even take that much. Jeez.
There's one thing that just popped in my mind that I think is important to recognize historically, and that's the fact that at no point in history in this massive, what is essentially a class struggle, which has been going on for however long, I mean, it was most embodied by Marxism and then the Bolshevik Revolution. Underneath the surface of that was this battle between the owners and the workers and who has the rights, and this sort of moral relativism came forward, and that has held through. It's ever apparent now in the world with the highest level of inequality by some estimates than ever before. And the difference between now and the history of this class oppression, this inherent bigotry that's been existing, is that we can actually see that it's not necessary. We can actually scientifically prove that these resource allocations are actually wrong and non-beneficial and violent, because there's no reason to have the offset anymore because of the federalization and the ability to create a global abundance, a very high abundance, and to live within the balance of sustainability. So it's not like everyone has everything. You can't do that. And once you take the sustainability algorithm of nature and you mix it with the population and realize we can't have everything that we need, and realize that social stability and ecological stability are right in the middle of it, the logic is absolutely codified. And that's what was never occurring in the early 20th century when these types of arguments were put forward.
It's like math. It's
Exactly.
I just want to go back to the life ground because you've been mentioning it a couple of times. Referencing the life ground is because also that's the unifying, value. It's the unifying attribute. Okay, so you take away the air and everyone dies. That kind of attribute. Because it's trying to break down so many cultural barriers, so many fears and inhibitions between class and race and even different people of different religions. So how do we speak to people in a way that's not going to push one of their buttons? And also get them to understand, that we're not talking about some sort of dictatorship where everyone's conforming to the same thought process. No, not at all. So the life ground is where we start, and also it's that's basically a lot of the reasons why you'll hear it referenced. Now, if you are project-oriented towards providing a life ground need, that's a different conversation. But as far as why we're referencing it so much, it's a way for us to try to address the parallel value in communication, so people can actually listen, not be up in their head with, oh, you're going to take away my mansion, whatever,
And just touching up on off-grid communities and why I think they're such a powerful transition tech is the way they disempower violent safety nets that we're dependent upon while we build new non-violent safety nets.
That's good. Also, if there's scarcity within any off-grid community, you're going to see the same behavior patterns repeat themselves. So, matter of fact, at some point I wanted to look into, what was that city in Madison? No, there was some $4 billion or $400 billion city. You had to buy in and live there. It's supposed to be an off-grid city. But at some point, I do want to go and look at what happened, because there were hundreds of billions of dollars put into this high-tech version of a commune, basically, to see what were the challenges and did they really succeed as far as changing behavior, or did they bring the outside cultural baggage inside their high-tech community and end up fighting with each other and whatever the same manner. I have to look that up, but it comes to mind as a high-tech example that needs some investigation.
Is it Oregon?
Can't remember the name. It came with a name.
I don't think they built it.
But it was in the end. Next question,
We
sorry.
have our next question in the lab.
Hi.
And yes, and I came here really to thank you, first of all, for the work that you do and the way you shine and how you prevail and allow everyone else around you, because this is why we're here. And so when I came, I knew that I am going to have to say something. And I have no questions anymore. I never ask questions anymore. This is the answer that I have. First, I was thinking, what am I going to ask you? And then it all evolved when you said, ask the people. And so I have an answer, because finally I have a question that was directed to me as a representative. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And so the answer that I have is that the moment you understand that you in absolute complete service for divine plan for humanity, divine vision plan for humanity, that if you don't ask questions, you do what needs to be done, you get it. You get freedom, you get ownership on who you are and what you eat and everything, and who you want to be with. And you let go of everything. You let go of every layer, every thought. You not only change your mind, you clear your mind, you empty, you make it neutral, you stay in neutrality, you don't go below, you love.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
So the first thing I want to do is, again, thank you all for the quality work we do to involve humanity. And I want to thank you, Peter, because today you answered the question I've been asking for a while, which is, how do we get from here? And today you actually told us. I'm very grateful. And when I say told us, I mean, you didn't fill in all the dots, you said, you expressed how integral the chapters were, so that when the fit does hit the shan, and people are basically sounding like Scooby-Doo, there's a bunch of people who think, oh yeah, we've been talking about this for years. Here you go. Right. And so thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kevin, I want to ask you like,
sorry. Never mind. You're next. You're number 5.
It's unanswerable.
I just wanted to say, it kind of ties in with this beautiful woman back there in orange that talked, is I'm known by many from Occupy LA as Occumom. And I learned a lot in being in that organization. I've learned to stop talking religion and instead to talk spirituality. And I've kind of seen spirituality portrayed in some of the displays here where they talk about a natural law. Because there are people that will not believe in God. They just, and it's because God has been manipulated. He has, for greedy, selfish goals. And religions have been created to divide mankind, to say that we're different. But if you believe in goodness, that's how I define God. What is good is God.
That's right.
Okay? And it's that goodness that unites and brings us together. And if you look at what our government has done in the form of, oh, we'll take care of humanity, it's called welfare. It's called entitlements. Here's the money to take care of you, or here are the food stamps. And I'm kind of one of those old-fashioned people that believe in giving the person, teaching the person to fish so he can eat for the lifetime. Don't keep giving him a fish a day and making it so that, oh, you're not going to do what I say you're going to do? No, you don't get your fish today.
Well, as it happens, I go to work.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to move away from that, and we need to through our love, and that's actually inherent in each and every one of us. Rich, poor, black, white, gay, straight, no matter what. It's something that we as human beings have all been given. And this is just, this whole thing today has been very inspirational for me and encouraging. And like they say, sometimes they say, well, how are we going to get to there from where we are now? And I think that I've heard this multiple times, and I'll say it because oftentimes we say, well, we got to do this, we got to do that. And the words I'd like to leave everybody with is be the change.
Amen.
So, thank you. We have 15 minutes left. Try to keep it to questions and short praises. Okay? Just because then we can fit in as many people as we can. So, but we'll.
my question.
Yes, hi.
The thing is, like everything you talk about is like for mankind to create like a utopia. That's like, it seems like the bottom line, just like unify, create a utopia.
If you go through everything in this room right now, if you actually read every piece of material, if you read, there is no utopia in anything we're talking about. And we don't promote a utopia, we don't talk about a utopia, because that is a fixed, final, static destination that doesn't exist. It's a myth, it's a fantasy, and that's why we don't play around in that land.
Okay, yeah, I mean, whatever. That's good, because it seems...
we live in a state of perpetual deficiency with a global population that doesn't even know they're in it.
Yeah. So
that's the real elevation is to a real society that's collaborative, that's working, that's efficient, that's sustainable.
Bravo.
A real society isn't utopian, it's just real.
Yeah, there you go.
That was touched on by so many people. It's like, how do you treat the underlying cause of all of the problems? It's the fear. It's the fear
Yeah.
with everybody. It's the lack of not having. It's just the fear of not getting what you want, losing what you have. Whether you're a billionaire or whether you got 2 cents and a cheesy cracker. You know what I mean? Is there?
Well, I'll say this
how are you
before.
going to treat the fear to get people to wake up and stop being AKA douchebags? So you're
People are going to have to realize what's possible, and they're going to have courage. Everyone's going to have courage when it comes to any kind of change.
Yeah.
Look at the civil rights movements across the world. These guys are fearless.
Yeah, Martin Luther King.
Gandhi walked up against little man, walked up the whole tribe, walked up against guys with batons and got the shit beaten out of them over and over and over again until the other people got bored. So this type of stuff does have that element of courage, by all means, where you're going to have to, and that's why the global community is so important. No one individual can make this change. You have to have the global solidarity, build this movement out, and it's holographic. We come to each other's aid. By the time, say, hopefully in 10, 15 years, there's so many chapters, there's so much strength, that if anything moves against any one section of this movement, other movements can respond and draw awareness to it. That's the beauty of having a global movement. We work in numbers. The power for this type of change is only in numbers, and then the fear will subside. Because if you're in a group and you're in support, you're going to be much less fearful. If you're alone, clearly you're going to be more fearful.
So how do you have that unified fearlessness without everybody being calm? Good point.
And just to finish on that, I mean, this is about creating more chapters, expanding. Yes, there is an LA chapter here, but it's an activist group. What we have working here, what you see here, this event came from a core group, an activist group, whether you call it the LA chapter or not. It came from an activist group, a core group of people that are coordinating efforts and following up with each other, doing legwork, etc. This is just one activist group's possibility here, and I definitely would love to see it's encouraged that other activist groups, new generation, if you will, activist groups start to form throughout Los Angeles, as naturally would make sense to. I mean, there's core groups that work well together. Once you introduce more people, it starts to get it's efficient as a certain size. So I'm always trying to encourage other activist groups within Los Angeles, of course, all chapters throughout the world to spawn.
All right, rapid fire question time.
All right, yeah. 10 minutes. All right, I've got a quick question. I think it's great that everything that we're coming together to do, but you hear a lot of alarmists like that things are really later than we think they are, and that if we wait for critical mass, it'll be too late. So how do you address the urgency? Like, how do we address that with fracking, global warming, climate change, ecocide on a massive scale that's happening rapidly, and it seems like it's spinning out of control? How do we address this? It seems like there's a greater sense of urgency than maybe some of us in these activist organizations possess, because we want to proselytize and try to win people over. And so basically, how do we address the great sense of